to the One Soccer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Kareem Rae. Today, I'm excited to be joined by a special guest, Daniel Rutstein. Daniel, thanks for taking the time. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, Kareem, thank you very much for having me on. So I'm Dan. I'm the president of the business side of Orange County Soccer Club of the USL.
Amazing. So, this is my favorite question to always start off with. How did you get involved in the beautiful game?
So I've always been involved in the beautiful game, one way or another. Though this is actually my first, I guess, my first real job in the sports admin side. So I grew up in England, as you can tell from the accent. So we're sort of all football fans because that's just how it ends up being. But I played at a reasonable standard. I was a season ticket holder for AFC Wimbledon, who were called Wimbledon and were a founding Premier League team. Now we're in the third division. I also refereed at a reasonable level. I did semi-pro in the UK and ended up doing some international stuff on this side of the country, on this side of the world as well. And I was a sports journalist for 10 years, covering many sports, but I did a lot of football, which was fantastic. And then I did a variety of other jobs in government and in tech, and then I ended up uh, running Orange County Soccer Club, which is absolutely my dream job. And my English friends don't believe that there is a real job running a football team in Southern California.
Amazing. So, what year did you come to the US and why the US from the UK? Because I've been to the UK and I grew up here in Canada, but I've been to the UK back in 2018 and absolutely love it. The football culture is completely different from the UK to the US or compared to Canada. So big switch.
Yeah, so I came here 11 years ago, and it was with work. At the time, I was working for the British Diplomatic Service, so I was posted to Los Angeles. So I came out here with work, and so I did 4 years in government here. But because of my love of sport, I managed to sneak some sport into that. So when the British teams came out and played the American teams as part of these summer series that they do, we did events with the different clubs. We did events with Manchester City, with Everton. I remember going to, I think, a Liverpool Chelsea game at the Rose Bowl. And it was something when I was in Germany I did every time a British team played a German team in the Champions League. I'd always go to those games as well. So it's great for me to be able to mesh my true love with my work. And then I ended up leaving government and staying out here. But I love the time now. So I look back in only, and you'll know this as well. In the 11 years that I've been here, the journey that soccer's been on from sort of a relatively sort of niche sport to obviously, we've got a World Cup coming. There's Ted Lasso. There's the Wrexham stuff. I think people see it very, very differently now.
Hmm. It's quite interesting because I feel like the perspective of Europeans, of the perspective of football, used to kind of look down at the US per se. And I feel like that's kind of changing. The US is earning its respect and the game's evolving at all the different levels, especially at the professional level. What are your thoughts on the perspective globally on the US now from your experience?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that there's some different levels to it. So I think America is definitely respected as a soccer country now in some ways. So obviously you look at players like Pulisic, obviously at Chelsea and now playing in Italy, but they've been very legitimate players at nearly all of the biggest European clubs now. There've been people at Barcelona and people at Juventus, and obviously the people in the UK as well. And I think that really helps legitimize it. So in the old days, it was a bit of a novelty. So I think Fulham have had more American players than most British clubs. And so when Clint Dempsey was over there, obviously Tim Howard plays over there. They were one of not many. Um, I play golf sometimes with Joe Max Moore, who played in 3 World Cups, and when he was over at Everton, like I think he was the only American there at the time, and if maybe there was two by the time he left, so it was a novelty. But now, the standard journey for Americans is to go over and play in Europe, and some of and they're doing incredibly well. So I think Europeans see talented American players and take them very seriously. I think they understand that America, particularly as a sort of as a nation of immigrants and people of second generation, is a great place to have big crowds. So over the last few years, British teams have come and done their summer games and they've played in front of 60,000 people at SoFi. They've played in front of, I think, 100,000 in Ann Arbor. I think Chelsea had as a crowd. So some of the biggest attendances for British teams have taken place in friendlies in America. So they know that there's a real passion for the game. I was at the Club World Cup game when PSG played Atletico at the Rose Bowl in front of 80,000 people the other day, which is the biggest game I've ever been to and the biggest crowd PSG or Atletico had played in front of. So there's something there. The only caveat to that, and I don't want to sound mean, but I don't think MLS is regarded by the Europeans in the same high regard as American players and football in general, just because of the nuances of no promotion relegation, all those sorts of things. But as a nation of players and fans, Europeans, I think, definitely take America seriously and are very excited for the World Cup.
100%. You know, I want to touch on promotion relegation in the US. It's been a discussion behind the scenes for quite a bit now. It's come to light. USL wants to implement it and is working on it currently. I listened to the 76 Capital podcast with Justin Papadakis, and he had mentioned that USL is in the works of that. I'm interested to get your thoughts on the USL implementation of promotion relegation and what that could potentially look like.
Yeah, look, I've got lots to say about this, and I've been thinking about this a lot. But before I do, if you don't mind, Kareem, I'm going to ask you a question. So obviously, you have a disproportionately high knowledge of the global game compared to your average American or Canadian. So how do you see it in terms of what you've heard from people? Because obviously you know it is happening in Europe, but in terms of sort of whether people in North America particularly care about it and how that's changing. What's your perspective been on that?
Yeah, so we're flipping it on me. Yeah, no, I love that question. So I think that it's done across Europe. Promotion relegation is all those leagues, UK, Denmark, all these different countries follow that formula, and it's been successful. And I think US needs to do the same in order to continue to grow the game. The MLS I've heard and listened to is trying to follow the NFL model. But that's not the beautiful game around the world. And I think that again, US needs to follow that criteria. And with USL pushing that ball forward there, I think it's going to be interesting. And there needs to be a reason why players are playing, right? If there is no reason to play, then the true passion's not going to be there. The fans will be more engaged into their clubs, even though I know I love USL's motto, a community focused asset. Um, I think promotion relegation just adds that flair of what's going to happen, who's going to what are the three clubs that are going to get relegated, what are the three clubs going to get promoted. Um, so I think there's a lot of benefits to promotion relegation and just to keep it simple, I think US just needs to follow what's been working around the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something in that. I mean, real football has been played around the world for 130, 140 years, in organized leagues, and the promotion relegation is a huge part of it. And some of the best stories are promotion relegation. So I think for me, I'm very excited about it. So the team I support in England, AFC Wimbledon, I've got a sort of probably a larger than usual sample size of fans watching teams go up and down because our team has been up at least 12 times and down a couple of times. So, nearly every season is either up or down for us. And so I live and breathe promotion relegation. So when I first moved to America, and I was learning the leagues here, it felt like the most obvious thing that was missing. So I'm very excited to be part of a USL that recently voted to bring it in. It's going to be here from ideally from 28 onwards. Now there's a lot of detail to work out, exactly how many go up, exactly how many go down, what parachute payments are going to look like, what the format's going to be. There's a lot of different ways of doing it, but the fundamental principle that we're doing it is amazing. And I think as a club, I think there's three things. So the first one is fan engagement. So every game matters. There is not a scenario where you trade away your best players at the end of the year because you're preparing for next year and you're just going to tank, which is obviously something that happens in all the American major sports teams to an extent. You do that and you end up in the division below. So every game matters. And actually, some of the most interesting games are at the bottom of the table, not at the top of the table. Teams fighting to survive is so engaging. So from a drama, from a jeopardy point of view, it's so much there. At the beginning of every year, you're waking up, you're like, this is the year we're going up. Or for some teams, this is a year where I hope we don't go down. But there's something to sort of think about and get excited about. So I think from a fan engagement point of view, it's great. Linked to that, obviously, from a business side, commercially, that creates a lot of things. So there's some very sponsorable opportunities. I know Americans like to give things names, so the whole sort of decision day sort of stuff. There's going to be a real increase in commercial interest. So with all the extra drama and jeopardy, broadcasts are going to want to be more involved. I know, obviously, USL, we've got a great relationship with CBS. They love all of this stuff. They'll be very keen to do more around the promotion relegation broadcast. We've got sponsors who are very interested in that because now suddenly, even if your team aren't doing very well and they're fighting for avoiding relegation, you're still getting TV coverage, and a goal scored in the last minute of the season that keeps you up is suddenly now brand worthy, while in the old days no one would care about the bottom of the league. So I think commercially there's huge opportunities. And then I think for the players as well, particularly where America is, in terms of, the dream of a lot of young American players is to make it over to Europe. And I think playing, and again, I don't want to sound like I'm just criticizing MLS, but playing in MLS Next Pro where games don't really mean anything. And I know they have their little penalty shootouts and all this sort of stuff, but it's not real football in front of real fans. But actually, if you have a young player, and obviously Orange County, we develop a lot of young players. If you've got a young player involved in a relegation scrap over here as a 19-year-old and then gets signed by a Danish team or a Swedish team or a German team, I think they are better equipped to deal with that now happening in Europe than if you've just played MLS Next Pro or college over here. I think it gives players a real chance to learn a different part of the game. And that also applies within the division. So I imagine there's going to be a development model in the future where a player starts in USL League One, does well, gets signed by a championship team, and we've signed players from the league below, but then they get signed from a championship team up to a Division One team, and then they go to Europe. So maybe their team gets promoted, but maybe they just get effectively promoted within the system before going, with real transfer fees being paid. I think that's an incredible model for players and for clubs. So you put all that together. Once you've sorted out the details, this is all good for American soccer.
Absolutely. I want to dive a bit deeper into the pro rel. What was some of the pushback behind the scenes with club owners in regards to why we shouldn't implement it?
Yeah, great question. And I think some of that, and I'd love to know what it was like in England 120 years ago when they were first deciding about this stuff, because I think the issue has been some of it is some of the owners of the teams in our league. They also own teams in American sports league where there is no up and down. So from a pure business point of view and protecting your investment, you don't want to be going down. And this is why MLS can never have promotion relegation. San Diego paid 500 million for their franchise. You wouldn't want to get relegated after paying that. So I think there is a sort of asset value commercial risk to this. I think until they announced the new Division One for us, for USL League One teams, this became not a promotion relegation discussion, it became a promotion discussion because they can come out of their league into the championship. From the USL Championship point of view, it wasn't promotion relegation, it was just relegation because we can't go anywhere. So, you bring it in and suddenly you're paying more for your players, you're paying more to sort of strengthen your team, and there's no upside. All there is downside. So I think that was why this has taken so long. But I think Now there's a potential new Division One within USL, so the championship teams have all got something to go up to, and the risk of going down. Plus, the increased interest in broadcast that we've now got means there's definitely going to be a prize. Like you need something, and it not just promotion, but is there Champions League places at the top as well? And I think you need that broader ecosystem to fit around it, and then it makes sense. Without that, it is a little bit artificial, and you're just creating downside without upside.
Understood. I've heard Justin Papadakis from USL say on the 76 Capital, USL will be implementing the good things of Pro Rel, and it's going to be a customized Pro Rel. It's not going to be the exact same. Um, you know, with saying that, you've already mentioned the upside, the downside, and how you guys have thought about it. Um, and with implementing D1 and having all the league, I mean, USL 1, USL Championship have something to look up to and not just down. With saying that, what are some of the requirements for Division 1 clubs to meet
Yeah,
that are not going to, I mean, I don't want to say it's not going to be easy, but that's going to take some time to do.
yeah. I mean, I think the reality is, and maybe this should have been part of my answer to your last question, is this is not straightforward. There are there's probably 10 different versions of promotion relegation just in terms of how many go up and down and how it works. So, there is three automatic or two plus teams coming through the playoffs. You've got a version where the team who finishes, last place in the league above can play a head-to-head playoff with the team who maybe finish, near the top of the league below. Like there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And other leagues, in England, they went through versions of this and they changed some of the things. Like Germany, they still have that big Jeopardy game. So there's lots of different ways. So you've got to pick the right one. So that's the first thing. There is also the whole, the year you bring it in, it's very complicated. Like how does all that work? You need to give teams a good ramp up so they know they don't suddenly get into that year. But nobody in America is going to want to be the owner of the first team to get relegated. So you need a proper system set up. Do you do parachute payments for the teams who get relegated like they do in the Premier League to soften the blow of going down from the leagues? Then you have the issue about what are the regulations of the different leagues and how does that work? So there are often famous stories from England of teams finishing top of the fifth division and not taking promotion up to the fourth because they couldn't afford to pay for the ground improvements that they would have needed. So, how does that work? Do you give teams 3 years to implement whatever the size of stadium is if they get promoted? Can you only apply, can you even compete for promotion if you've already got the stadium? There's a lot of that stuff that's complicated. You know, US soccer's in an odd place because I think you need a 15,000 seat stadium to be Division One. So if they started it tomorrow, there would be two Premier League teams. Well, two of last year's Premier League teams wouldn't be allowed to play in the American top division because Luton Town and Bournemouth stadia are too small. So is 15 the right number? That's a question for somebody else. But what is the right number? Do you have some leeway there? Is it 15 capacity? Is it 15,000 seats? Like, there's lots of different ways of looking at it. So it is definitely complicated. And it will take a while to settle down. Imagine they'll bring this in and then some team from League One will win League One, but they're playing on a baseball field or a turf field with American football markings, and therefore they're not really wanted in the championship. How long do you give them to get that ready? A team could win. We won the USL Championship in 21. If we won it again in 28, we haven't got a 15,000 seat stadium now. In a 5 to 10 year ramp up, maybe we will have, but we definitely won't have one straight away. So there is a lot of complications to it. So part of the reason they've given themselves 3 years to do this, and I think I'm not allowed. I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this, but maybe it'll end up being 29 or 30 for this reason. There is a lot to sort out. Like we're 100 years behind other leagues who have done this, so it's complicated. And there's a big piece of work between the USL and US Soccer to work it out. But I think the key thing is it's worth solving. Like whatever these problems are, everybody believes this is the right thing to do. So if it's a bit complicated, or maybe one team's going to feel unfairly treated as part of this, as an ecosystem and for the good of the game in this country, it must be the right thing to do. So let's think about and solve these problems.
Yeah, I'm truly excited for you guys for the league as well, and to see the game grow, continue to grow in the US. From a standpoint of ironing out the details, that's from my perspective, the easy part. The hard part is the stadium. That takes time, and finding land, building the right stadium, the right capacity, the right experience, et cetera, et cetera. Those things are the things that take time to do, and I'm curious to see how that all plays out. And to see the finer details of how many teams will be in the first division, and all those finer details later on when they come out. Um,
Yeah. And look, one small point, and it's a really important point, is um, the model's definitely there and the appetite's going to be there to make it work. If you look at the last few years here, USL teams have been beating MLS teams in the Open Cup regularly. Um, a handful every year, which shows, as it always does, and this is the case in all the cup competitions in Europe, the FA Cup being the most famous, but I think Ajax got knocked out by a fourth division team in the Dutch Cup recently. The excitement of that movement and the excitement of teams playing a different opponent is definitely there. And I think between the Open Cup and this year, the Jägermeister Cup that they've added in the USL, I think there's been somebody will know the exact number. I think there's been probably at least 10 cup sets of some kind between, and unfortunately we were on the wrong end of Antelope Valley knocked us out of the Open Cup. So we've seen it happen. They knocked us out on penalties at their place. But there's obviously a desire for this cross-league games, and the fans love playing teams from different divisions. So the idea that you could get promoted, you could be a League One team who keeps winning in the Open Cup, and you deserve to be in the Championship. Maybe you go up there and get immediately relegated because you can win one-off games, but you can't do a whole season. Like that's what those layers are what make sport so fascinating over here.
yeah, I love that. And Antelope Valley is a new USL One team.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many things to touch on. You mentioned the storylines that to capture from Pro Rel. Sunderland Till I Die, watched it on Netflix. Great documentary showcasing the club's history and fans continuing to support as the club continues to drop. As well as, so many thoughts running through my head right now. I'm kind of just speaking out loud here, but I wanted to get your thoughts, right? Before I heard the announcement with USL announcing Pro Rel, I'd had banter with my friends and say, hey, what if USL did that, which USL is now doing? And what kind of position are you guys putting MLS in now, right? Because does that create a conversation of maybe 5, 10 years? Does USL sell to MLS or some merger acquisition per se? Like what, if you could share, what are you guys thinking for the long term of potential integration with MLS if possible, or is USL just on our own?
Yeah, I don't see a version of life where there is MLS involvement just because of the franchise fee. Because a lot of the team, they're buying into a closed system in the same way that if the Portland Pickles baseball team or the Rocket City Trash Pandas, like if you thought you could get into Major League Baseball by winning, your AAA championship or or single A or whatever, like it's just not a thing in those other sports. You don't go into the NFL because you won arena football or you had a good summer league in the G League and suddenly you're now playing against the Lakers. Like
Yeah.
it's just not there. And that's why the values of American sports franchises are so utterly insane. I think a cheap team is in the low billions, and the Lakers just went for 10 billion. And MLS wants to be that. They don't want to see themselves as a rival to the Premier League. I mean, I know they play their games against Liga MX and all that sort of stuff, but they're not trying, at least as at like corporate level, to be like those other teams. They're trying to be like the other American franchises. So they need a closed system because otherwise the franchise values can't go up. So I think there's two MLS teams that are worth over 1 billion now. I think LAFC being one of them. That's a great model. Now, LAFC didn't win a game, I don't think, in the Club World Cup, but they're worth $1 billion. So what's the important thing? And look, in America, the important thing is for MLS owners owning a team that's worth a lot of money and will continue to grow. So I can't see a world where they would risk any of that for the good of the global game. Because if they were, they would have done this 20 years ago. They know enough about football that they could have done this, but they have deliberately chosen not to be. They want to be an American sports franchise league, which is great for them. And, if I could afford to be an owner and know I could make even more money, I would want that. As a true passionate fan of football, I would not want that. So I think the USL will be on its own. Now, there is some risk to MLS here because USL gets Division One status. Suddenly, do the players want to come and play in USL Division One, or do they want to go and play in MLS? It's we're definitely on their radar to talk about. I think they've got MLS Next Pro, which isn't a rival to USL, but it's definitely altered our ecosystem. We used to take, when we won the championship in 21, I think we had 4 MLS players on loan. And now it's really hard to get a loan because they just loan them back down into their own system. So I don't know how much they worry about us. I think they worry about their deal with Apple and the Liga MX stuff a lot more than they worry about the USL. But we are a serious league with serious broadcasting taking place, not behind a paywall. And I think, when Division One launches and we see the sort of the teams who participate, some will be championship teams going up, or some will, I imagine there'll be new teams with overseas investment coming in. Maybe that's when MLS will start getting worried. But I just don't see a practical way they could join the ecosystem. But money talks, and maybe if USL continues to grow the way it does, maybe there is a conversation to be had at some point about what that looks like. Because it will be a bit odd if there's two Division Ones in this country with USL Division One teams going into Champions League spots and potentially playing MLS teams and potentially beating them. And I don't know what happened to the Open Cup as well. So it's a good problem to have for us, less so for them.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. So,
What do you think is going to happen?
and well, I'd be speculating. But the points that you shared gave me so much more clarity on that point I just brought up, and it makes so much sense with everything that you just said. Um, I wanted to make a comment on the U.S. Open Cup. I think that's why Americans love the U.S. Open Cup. It kind of has that touch of pro rel per se, um, experience, and I'm just excited and interested to see what's going to happen in the future, right? Because I didn't know. I mean, I've heard that USL was going to launch D1. I just didn't know if it was possible, if it was going to happen or not, from a outsider, right? But now hearing that announcement, it's exciting. And, we just wrapped up the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup. I heard mixed emotions about that, listening to different podcasts, people saying, experts within the space saying that FIFA could have done a better job, should have marketed better, more time. The space is more competitive with the top 4 or 5 other sports, etc. What days games were played, what time games were played, stuff like that. So I think, you know, I'm going to keep it as simple. We just wrapped up the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup. Next year, we're moving on to the 2026 World Cup, hosted completely different format, hosted by Canada, US, Mexico. 2028, you got the Olympics, and then potentially 2031, you got a FIFA Women's World Cup in the US. So I wanted to get your perspective on, with all these major sports events happening in the US, what impact will it have on the soccer landscape? And, you know, I'm doing a 2-on-1. What are your thoughts on the World Cup?
Yeah. So, look, good question again. I think there's a it's going to have real material impact for us. So just quickly on the Club World Cup, at the top end, it was a great tournament. They had I think the average attendance ended up being about 40,000. There were some great games and some great stadia. The mistake they made was a very sort of naive, greedy mistake. Is the size of the stadiums for the small games. if they had been sensible, um, they could have played USL stadia for some of the smaller games. No one cares about the overall size of the stadium. They care about how many people are in it compared to the capacity. So PSG and Atletico at the Rose Bowl was amazing. 80,000 people. I mean, there's a 90,000 capacity, but I mean, that doesn't matter. 80,000 people was amazing. Great game, great atmosphere. There was some travel logistics, but that's always going to be the case in America where everyone's driving. But when there was, the Japanese team against, I think, one of the South American teams, and the crowd was 2,500. Now, you played that in our stadium, our 5,000 seat stadium, it would have been great. Ticket price is a bit low. You could probably have sold it out. Now, it's not 5,000 isn't a lot, but that's the right number for those teams on a Monday lunchtime or whatever it is. Then I think that could have been really good. So I think they could have definitely brought football to smaller communities. And they would have been I think it's a missed opportunity that they didn't. But overall, look, I think it was great. And obviously the World Cup, there's a minimum stadium size, and every game's going to be sold out, I imagine. Um, I think for me, there's three bits to this. So there is the what's happening sort of culturally at the moment. So the World Cup's part of this, but there's other things going on. So the Wrexham stuff, the number of people who've become fans of football because of the Wrexham documentary is extraordinary. Linked to that, the number of people who've become fans because of Ted Lasso, which is now about to do another season, has been extraordinary and has helped with promotion relegation because in both of those shows, going up and down is part of it. So that's been a recent phenomenon. So I think that's really helped get football into popular culture. I think the second thing is like personality driven football. So if there's one place in the world where there's like a cult of personality that can move the dial, it's this country. So Lionel Messi playing in the MLS has been great for football broadly. Now, is it good for the MLS and Lionel Messi? I mean, lots of money's being made, but the fact they have to give refunds when he doesn't play and so on is not great. But in terms of public consciousness, people, there'll be people wearing Messi shirts at our games. Messi has driven this. And, in LA, they love their sort of former World Cup winners. So, Giroud coming over here, um, Lloris coming over here. It's obviously been done in the past with Beckham, with Steven Gerrard. That really helps drive broad interest in the sport. So that's pretty good. And then you layer on top actual real international football here, and that's the missing piece. So you've got that now. So the Club World Cup, even though some of the storylines were negative about, crowds and so on, it was being talked about. Obviously, there was the Copa America last year. Then the World Cup's coming. I was about 6 months ago, I think I was driving to work and I was listening to the radio, and a commercial came on for Bank of America, um, talking about them being a sponsor for the World Club. And that's the first soccer commercial I've heard in this country in my car. Um, and there'll be a lot more of that. And I think that's how you get people. Messi was in the Super Bowl, I think the last 2 years. Um, there'll be footballers on Wheaties boxes. There'll be just stuff everywhere. So if you go to England, I was in England during the Euros, um, and if you walk into a supermarket, every product in every aisle is associated with one of the England team. So
Mm.
even if you hate football, you can't avoid it. Now, that's what it's like in America ahead of the Super Bowl and ahead of the World Series. But it's never been like that for soccer, where you can't avoid the billboards and the TV commercials and the supermarket. There'll be that. Over the next year, there'll be stuff everywhere. And I think that's got to help because America does things properly, and obviously so do Canada and Mexico. Every match will be like a Super Bowl, and so that's 60 Super Bowls in 6 weeks with all of the associated media and press spend and all that stuff in advance. So you're not going to be able to avoid it. So you put together the cultural element, the sort of the player-led element, and now the fact that the games are here and all the associated stuff around the games. Soccer in America by next summer will be unavoidable. And then it's just a case of is there enough to keep it going. And obviously the Olympics will help, but I think compared to 94, there wasn't much going on in 94. So after the World Cup left, there was nothing to work with. Here you've got obviously all of the MLS. You've now got three divisions of USL already. If you include USL League Two, where they're bringing in new teams all the time, everyone will be able to find a local football game everywhere in this country. And I think that's a magnificent thing. So apologies for the long answer, but I think it's a unique opportunity to have the biggest sporting event in the world taking place in a country that does sporting events pretty well at a time when the game is growing and everyone's kids are playing it. It's the perfect storm.
100%. It's the fastest growing sport in America, soccer. And um, a great point one of the biggest points that I took away was the 94 World Cup. There was nothing for people to attach to connect to watch, to play. 2025 or 2026 is a completely different story with what you mentioned. So 100%. You know, given your experience with government, Trump, right? Let's talk about Trump. It changes the minds of fans of coming to the US. What impact can you see with the logistics and getting into the country and out?
So, I, so one thing I definitely learned in my time in government is as a foreigner, it's definitely not my place to be talking about the internal politics of another country. I think the only thing I would say in relation to this is that my understanding is in all of the immigration stuff that's going on, which is obviously very complicated um, and can be quite difficult for fans, particularly soccer fans. Um, there are carve outs in the agreements around players and fans from soccer nations sort of competing in the World Cup coming. So it's definitely a complicated backdrop. I think doesn't doesn't quite help paint the picture the way you would want it to. I mean, you look at all of the stuff in advance of some of the other World Cups, like in Qatar, there was a lot of issues around uh, being was it an inclusive type of nation for a World Cup? I don't think we're quite there for that here, but there's definitely some practical arrangements. There will be some people who will not be able to come because it's always been difficult to get a visa to America. If you've got a criminal record in another country, you can't come to America normally. So that was going to be an issue anyway. But obviously this year things are heightened. So moving between potentially Mexico and Canada and America, there will be some fans who probably can't come. Um, there will be some, there will be probably some fear from people about congregating at football matches and fan zones. I think there were some issues around the I think around the around Copper, around the Gold Cup with fans not wanting to go to fan zones. So it's definitely complicated. I mean, it's not my place to comment on American politics, but there's definitely some things to think about from a logistical point of view, and there will be some people who probably can't come now, but there are enough good things that a World Cup can bring, and I think some sense might years a long time in politics, and I think some things will change. So there's definitely a lot to think about, but I think um, it will work very well here. But there will be definitely plenty of stories of people who have real problems. But
Yeah.
one thing I will say is I remember I was at a dinner talking to one of the people who organised the '94 World Cup. And he told me a very interesting fact, which was when England did not qualify for that World Cup, um, but Iran did, their security budget went down because not having all the English hooligans coming over made a big difference to them managing that tournament. So World Cups are always complicated from a logistical point of view. And this one is going to be more difficult than usual because it's across an enormous country which doesn't have great public transport, and it's across three countries, so there's going to be a lot of stuff there. So Trump or no Trump, this is going to be quite a challenge.
Got it. Yeah, and I wanted to share with you too. I was in Miami in June for Conflict USA, which was their first event that they hosted. They host events in South America. And it was spontaneous. Me and a few friends, we ended up going to the Hard Rock, the game. Inter Miami played for the FIFA Club World Cup against Al Hilal, if I remember the team correctly. It was a red team. 63,000 plus people at the stadium. Amazing atmosphere. I haven't been to a game in a few years. I never thought I would have the chance to say I got to see Messi play or Suarez or Sergio Busquets. And it was such an interesting experience. We ended up parking on a residential lawn. Obviously got permission and paid cash. We walked about 15, 20 minutes to the stadium, watched the game, amazing experience. Getting out the stadium took a bit of time with, so many people getting out and then a bit of traffic coming out. I share that story to say, to highlight the Messi point, but as well as um, just you know, maybe I think this goes under logistics, the traffic of flow of people, right? Does that go under logistics?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually I was speaking at Comfort, so I was there. I didn't get to stay for the Miami El Hilal game, unfortunately. But the big sporting events are messy
Yeah.
anyway. So, if I go to a Chargers game, I'm sitting in the car park at SoFi for 2 hours, regardless, World Cup or not. It's just that's what it is. The um, I went along with 80,000 people to the Rose Bowl. It was an absolute nightmare. People missed kickoff. People missed the whole game because the traffic was so terrible. Um, Quite sure how it was so bad, given they've had 90,000 people there regularly for college football games. But for this, maybe it's the audience don't quite know what they're doing. But at the end of that game, it was a 3 hour wait for the bus to get back into Pasadena. So my group, which is myself and a friend and my son and his 8 year old, a 6 year old son, we walked 2 miles in 100-degree heat because that was better than waiting for the bus. So there'll be stories of people who, miss games, but I mean, they'll have to solve this. But also, the reality is, if you're going to go to a sporting event with tens of thousands of other people, it's not going to be simple. I've been to Wembley Stadium when there's 50,000 people, and it sort of just about works. But I've also, on Saturday night, I was in Chicago and I went to a Cubs game, just a normal midweek game. It was sold out because it always is. It took us like an hour to even get anywhere near getting onto the subway on the way back, just because that's sport. So I think, the no public transport thing will be complicated for people. A lot of people are going to make some money with probably dodgy taxi rides around the places, but there'll be issues because it's a big country with big stadiums and they're not used to having all these foreigners come in who don't own their own cars. But for those people in Brazil who were going on the train for 2 days to get to games, apparently like getting across South Africa wasn't entirely straightforward. In Paris for the Champions League a couple of years ago, I mean, there was a whole issue there with all the Liverpool fans, which was not their fault. It was the authorities' fault. It's complicated. So hopefully, some of the Club World Cup, some of the Copa America from last year, they can learn lessons. But if you're going to go to a World Cup game, even if it's Uzbekistan against Senegal, there'll be 50,000 people there, and you're going to have to expect to sit in traffic for 2 hours before and 2 hours afterwards because that's the price you pay.
Yeah. I heard with the Qatar World Cup was a cool experience in 22. Fans were able to go to a lot of multiple games because the stadiums
Yeah.
were so close to each other.
Yeah, and this I remember I went to the World Cup in France in '98 and we went to four different cities just by jumping in a car or going on a train. This World Cup's going to be a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, you might, depending on where your team ends up, you could play in three different countries, which would be very complicated. And everyone will be a flight, so it'll be interesting to see how it works. A lot of people are going to come because, in some ways, although it's a huge country, America's very accessible. So there was language barriers in Brazil, and there was people who were scared to go to South Africa, and there's people who didn't want to go to Qatar for a variety of reasons. But America feels like a sort of, a relatively easy country to visit. But if you want to see a game, you're flying 5 hours between cities potentially, and then sitting in traffic for 3 hours getting across LA. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the fans experience it. But I mean, it's going to be amazing. There'll be traffic issues, and they'll obviously the way social media works, people will focus on some of these issues, but that's just what an opportunity for this country to host a World Cup at the time when football's growing the way it is.
Huge. So then I want to come back to you with all your different experiences from, government to journalism and football. In your current role, how has all these different aspects of working in football, out of football, have helped you with the position of that you're in currently right now with the Orange County Soccer Club?
So I think for me, it's when I took the job, I got offered the job. So I thought, what shall I do? I've never run a sports team before. So I'll ask people what they think. So I called up a friend of mine who used to work at Manchester City, who actually now works at Manchester United as their chief communications officer. And I said, I'm about to take this job. What shall I do? And he said one word. He said community. He said you build the community and everything else follows. And I think what I've been able to bring to the role in terms of what we're trying to do is I'm obviously very English and grew up playing, refereeing, and writing about the game of football. And I am a true fan. I'm a part owner of AFC Wimbledon back at home, and I was a season ticket holder every year I lived in England, where I was allowed to be. And I think I understand football, but also I've run businesses before, and I now live in America. And I joke with some of my friends. Sometimes I've done some very un-British things over here. So I was the one who pushed for us to have a mascot, for example, which some teams in England do, but it's a very American sort of concept. But I pushed for that. I would love one day our games to be sold out on the basis of people just coming to watch football, but that's not how it works here. So I push for all of the theme nights, all the extra stuff that we do here to build a community around the club. So I think I'd like to think I bring the sort of football side from England, but the practical realism of modern America. So we're embracing all of that side of the business. I've always in government and in other companies, I've always prided myself on being able to build meaningful, authentic partnerships with people. And I think I look at how we work with some of our sponsors, everything from we have a charity set up in the name of somebody killed by a drink driver. It's the Noah Benadou Foundation, and we work with them around drink driving messaging and getting home safely. It's not a commercially huge partnership, but it's a valuable community partnership. But then we've done a partnership with a group called Food Beast, who are a local food influencer network, and we've introduced really fun food and drink challenges in the stadium and around the stadium. So I think it's about authentic community partnerships and having a global perspective. And we did a fan ownership scheme, and we've got 2,000 minority owners of our club, 1,500 in America across more than 40 states, and 500 in the UK. And it is about what we call community heart global vision. So it's being a real community club, but understanding the power of football across the world. And I think I'd like to think for me, it's about combining, say, the best of British and the best of American around the game of football. And that's why we've been able to do some of the great things that we have at this club.
Yeah. And that's a great point. Community asset, building a community, creating a place for people to work, live, and play. Um, I think Orange County was the second or third club I had seen with fan ownership. I'd seen it online, the opportunity for fans to be able a crowdfund on a crowdfunded platform to invest capital to own
Yeah.
a piece of the team. And I seen some of the activations you guys had fans on the field and stuff like that, depending on what package that fan had purchased invested in. Um, was there any big change for the front office on your side when you guys implemented fan ownership, or or was it just another community boost per se, or integration with the community per se?
Yeah, no, good question. I think the answer to that question is the big change wasn't necessarily the fan ownership. It was the reason why we did fan ownership. So what I mean by that is, so I'm an owner of Wimbledon in England, and I'm an owner of Wimbledon because our team was franchised in a way that happens all the time in America. It has never happened in England. Our team was moved from one part of the country to the other, to another. So we started a new team, and everybody in football was on our side, and we started a new team in the 13th division of English football, and everyone became an owner, and we became owners because the team meant something to us. Because when you take something away from people, that's when you realise what something means to you, and that's really important to me. So I see myself as not just a fan of the club, but as a, like I say, I'm an owner. I've got a different relationship now. I wanted to do something like that in Orange County, but there was not really a reason to. You can't just do it for the sake of it. We had a falling out with LA Galaxy, where are we, 4 years ago now, entirely implemented by them because they tried to throw us out of our stadium. And I think the moment for me where I knew this would work was we were in a council meeting with hundreds of our fans wearing orange, and they were chanting and holding up flags because we were about to be potentially thrown out of our stadium. And that was the moment I realised what this club meant to people. People went up, there was a like open comments, and people went up on stage, and there were people in tears talking about coming to games. And there was a gay couple talking about the inclusivity. There was a guy there with his baby in his arms. There was a young girl, Charlotte, who spoke really well about what the club meant to her and her family. And in that moment, I realised that we could do ownership here because people cared. And so that was the watershed moment that led to the community ownership. So over the next year, A, we did a deal and we did a 10-year deal at the stadium. But B, we launched the fan ownership the day after the 10-year deal was signed. And I think that's what created the passion that made everyone want to be owners. And we talk to fans now and they feel differently. So their ownership doesn't, they don't get to pick the team or any of that sort of stuff, but they feel differently about the club. And I think that's the bit that's been so special. So it was the triggering moment rather than the going on sale with the crowd fund that made the difference. But we feel different as a club that we have these owners now.
Yeah, amazing. And it's such a cool, unique opportunity for people to get involved in. With saying that, I know we're coming up on time. I had one quick question, and then the second one is a bit lengthier answer on your side for you. The quick question is, it's a 10-year deal, but are you guys thinking of building your own stadium soon?
A good question.
If you could answer.
Yeah. So look, there's no specific plan to now, but there is going to be a world at some point where we need to play in a bigger stadium. So we're looking to, at the moment, we're looking to make our stadium bigger within the footprint that we're in, and there's an opportunity to do that. That is the priority: is improving our facilities with new stands and new VIP areas. We've sold out half our games this year, so if we continue like that, we're going to need a bigger boat, as they say.
Amazing. And the last question that I have for you is the player pipeline that you guys have been able to the word I want to use is architect that pipeline from US to Europe. So if you could share how you guys have been able to do that, the numbers behind the transfers, just in regards to public numbers and why you guys and how you guys are doing it.
Yeah, and first of all, I always have to say this before we start. I'd love to take all the credit for it because it's brilliant, but it wasn't me. But I run the business side. We have soccer presidents. First, Oliver Wies, who is the now the league sporting director, and Pete Nugent, who's the soccer president at the moment, under the ownership of James Keston, our owner. We've pioneered, architected this system. I think we have sold 7 players to Europe now, which is more than any team in North America, including all the MLS teams. And it's a deliberate thing. I mean, the in the way that promotion relegation is very new and very exciting for America, so is transferring. But the rest of the world have been doing player transfers for years. It's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity over a year. And the reality is, as a young American player, if you're really going to make it, the move you want is not going up to MLS. Um, they are more likely to want to sign somebody who won the World Cup for France or Argentina 10 years ago than they are to give you a chance. You know, the best players in the American team are playing in Europe. So we want to give young American players that opportunity. So we have got this pipeline where we bring in young players very specifically. Like people sit down with their parents and say, we will sign your kid, we will play your kid in our reserves, we'll mix them into the first team, and then we will sell your kid to a European team and give them a real opportunity. So we've had probably now nearly 10 players who are US youth internationals, who are, the top players here, choosing to come to us because they know there's an opportunity to go to Europe. So we've sold to Feyenoord, the Dutch champions, we've sold to Rangers, the Scottish champions, we've sold to Stade de Rez in France, who are one of the sort of fastest growing young teams. We've sold to Wolfsburg in Germany. We've sold to Sweden. We've sold to Denmark. We just sold a player to Crawley Town in the fourth division in England, but still, six-figure transfer fee, playing going over to England. So, we sell these players, and from a business point of view, it's great business. There's a big transfer fee, and then there's a percentage sell-on fee. So, the second transfer is where it gets really interesting. So we sell to selling clubs effectively. So you sell to a club with the aim that your player does really well, and then they sell them on for a few million to somebody else, and then you're getting a big check for it. I mean, that bit's not new. I mean, when Pulisic moved, his club in America got a little bit of a check because it was a big transfer fee. That's how anyone who's played Football Manager will know that's how it all works. And for us, it's about finding players. We really train them. It's not just on the field. We do media training off the field. We talk to them about social media. We help them know how to navigate a locker room, how to behave. We've taken players on trial, sorry, sent players on trial, and they've made these transfers. And it's a really important part of what we've done as a club. And we hope probably not this World Cup, but maybe the next World Cup will feature former Orange County players who played for us as US youth internationals. We sent them to Europe, they've thrived, and then we'll see them on the national stage.
Amazing. Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure to have you on. There's so many more topics I'd love to discuss with you about, but I know we're up on time. And for now, I want to give a quick shout out to Atletico Dallas. I was rocking the jersey the whole time. You guys couldn't see it, but we also got some other USL jerseys here. We need an Orange County Soccer Club jersey to add in to wear and rock.
We
Um,
can make that happen.
let's do it. And Dan, I look forward to connecting. It would have been nice to connect with you in June at Conflict, but I look forward to connecting you with some time in the future in person and and meeting you. But with saying that for now, Dan, I just want to thank you for taking the time for being on the One Soccer Nation podcast.
Super. Thanks for having me on, Kareem. Appreciate it.